There are three things that darkness cannot contain: the moon, the stars, and the truth. All three will find their way through the darkness. Truth will often pierce its way through in unexpected ways, at unexpected times, and sometimes through unexpected people. Hello, my name is Lenora Howze, and you're listening to Secrets of the cHURTched, Revealed to Heal. It was Monday, January 16th, 1989. Yes, I remember the exact date, mostly because it was the day we recognized Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. However, not every state in the nation acknowledged it as a state holiday, and please feel free to fact-check me on this, but if my memory serves me correctly, Pennsylvania was one of the states that in 1989 did not. So it was on this day, armed with the unbelievable knowledge of where she worked, I came face to face with my birth mother. I lived in Philadelphia at the time, but my family, the Howzes, all still lived in the rural county where I grew up. My parents were empty nesters at that time and had been for a few years. And that year, my mother, Betty Howze, was very ill. She had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer about 3 years before, but she beat it, at least for a little while. But that year, in 1989, the cancer had come back, and my mother decided that she wasn't going through another round of chemo. It had stripped her of just too much. So knowing that she was ill and that it was terminal, I made the decision not to tell either of my parents about my discovery. After all, finding my birth mother was for me, to satisfy my need to know where I came from. My parents, particularly my mother, well, as far as she was concerned, I was her child, and she was my only mother. And I did not want her going to her grave feeling anything other than that. So she nor my father ever knew that on that cold winter day in January of 1989, that their adopted child had come to town to meet the woman who gave birth to their baby girl. So when I made the trip from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, it was really a covert mission. Only a few select people even knew I was in town. My sister Raquel and her husband, my sister Jody, and my sister-in-law, the late and beautiful Dorothy Howze. Now, I can't recall how much time had passed between my friend Carolyn making the call that connected her with Marion. And let me just stop right here and say this. If you haven't listened to episode 8 yet, you might want to do that before you go any further with this episode, because you have got to hear how God divinely orchestrated this whole connection. I mean, my mind is still blown all these many years later. But back to my point, I'm not sure how much time had gone by, but I know it was long enough for me to labor over every excruciating detail of how that day would unfold. How would I introduce myself? What would I say? What would she say? What would she look like? Would she deny even knowing me? And then there was the important question: what would I wear? No, I'm serious. Here I was going to this woman's job and confronting her with a secret that she thought she had buried decades before. For her, it would be like seeing a ghost. For me, well, I didn't know what I would feel like when I met her. I only knew that I had to do it. And as the old R&B song says, it was too late to turn back now. So early that Monday morning, my sister-in-law and I made the hour-long trip from Beaver County to the Pennsylvania State Office Building in downtown Pittsburgh. Now keep in mind, Marion, my birth mother, had no idea she would be meeting me that day. The only thing she knew was the ruse that my friend Carolyn had devised, that she would be receiving a package that day from the state office in Philadelphia. She wasn't expecting that package to be a 5'3" 30-year-old young lady who, by the way, looked exactly like her. So here's how it went down. First of all, I decided to write a short letter that I would hand to her as a way of telling her who I was. I couldn't think of any other way to do it, and I didn't want to come face to face with her and freeze or stumble over my words, or worse yet, be at a complete loss of words and not know what to say. And what did I wear, you ask? I think I heard somebody asking that. Well, for those who know me, you know that I'm a bit of a fashionista, so you know I had to be sharp. And back in the day, in 1989, you couldn't step out in the winter without a fur coat, and the fur that was known as everyone's first fur coat was the silver fox. Yes, you knew you had made it, or you were well on your way when you owned a silver fox coat. But not only did I need to look sharp, I needed to look like I was doing well. And I was. And that I wasn't coming asking for anything. And I wasn't. So donned with my silver fox fur coat, a pair of black suede pants, and a black hat with a gold emblem on the front, and carrying a dozen red roses to present to Marion, I entered this tall office building, took the elevator up the 12 or 13 floors. I can't remember. I just know it was the longest elevator ride of my life. Found my way to the small office to finally come face to face with my mother. I remember this day, this moment, as if it were yesterday. I stood nervously in the front of Marion's office where she shared with 3 other people. I recall seeing 2 black women, 1 white woman, and a white man. So I was able to easily narrow down which one could be my mother. In the brief time that I stood in the doorway, my eyes zoomed right in on Marion. I knew it had to be her. It was like looking at an older version of myself. And it was the first time in my life that I saw someone who looked so much like me. Yeah, it had to be her. But just in case, I stood in the office doorway and asked, was there anyone there by that name? Then the woman I had zoomed in on, the one who looked just like me, said, yes, I'm Marion. I remember the confused look on her face as she saw this stranger in her office doorway who knew her name and was bearing a dozen of roses. I also remember the look on her coworkers' faces. They too looked dazed and confused, as there was no denying that this stranger that just appeared in their doorway looked just like their coworker Marion. And to their knowledge, she didn't have a daughter. They only knew of her 3 sons. That's all anyone ever knew until that day. After handing her the flowers, I asked Marion if there was somewhere we could go to speak privately. So we left her office to go out to an adjacent and empty hallway. So there we were. Marion looking at me, still somewhat dazed and confused. I looking at her with 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind, the most prominent one being, wow, this is the woman who carried me in her womb, whose body I actually came from, whose blood runs through my veins. Wow. Then I did as I planned and handed her the letter I had written. I had purchased this special bright red stationery with matching envelopes for what would be the most important letter of my life. The letter started out by saying, "Hi, my name is Lenora Howze," but that was not the name I was given at birth. My birth name is Rochelle Thompson. I then proceeded to write that I didn't come to disrupt her life, or for that matter, to have a relationship with her. I told her that my main reason for wanting to find her was to see who it was that I came from and to hopefully find out something about my family history, particularly my medical history. I watched Marion as she fumbled nervously with this letter. I remember wondering if she had already figured out who I was. But even if she had, I'm sure that her mind couldn't wrap itself around what was happening. I mean, can you imagine if a child you parted with at birth just one day, 30 years later, showed up at your job? Well, I certainly can't imagine it. So, needless to say, Marion never made it past the first line of the letter where I told her what my birth name was. Her hands trembled as she dropped the red envelope and the stationery that the letter was written on to the floor. She knew who I was. She knew that I was the baby girl who she separated from at birth. She knew that she had come face to face with the child she never thought she'd see again. She knew that on this day, a day that probably seemed like any other when it first started out, any other Monday at the office, but it would be anything but that. It would be a day that would forever change her life, my life, her husband's and her family's lives. A day that would be the beginning of the end of her secret. I want to thank you all again for tuning into this podcast. It has been so freeing for me to share my journey to truth with you. I want to reiterate a point I've made before about why I decided, or better yet, why I believe I was called by God to do this podcast. I strongly believe that we can never walk in total freedom until we walk in total truth, even if that truth is painful and hard to face. And for many years, I didn't want to face the truth that I was the product of a church scandal and that my very existence was hidden from a world of people who shared my DNA. But when I accepted that truth, which, by the way, was long before I began this podcast, and when I understood that the lies and shame that I was born into did not define who I was and who I am, that's when I began to walk into my freedom. And as I've said before, this podcast is by no means designed to bring shame or embarrassment to anyone or to dishonor the memory of my birth parents. In fact, I thank God for them because, after all, they were responsible for bringing me into this world. And even though back then it would have been very dangerous or even life-threatening, my birth mother could have chosen to abort me. So I am grateful to Marion and to Herb, regardless of the circumstances that brought me here. And to my parents, the Howzes, I will forever be grateful for their choice to make me a part of their family and to make sure that I would never be hidden again.
You have been listening to Secrets of the Churched, Revealed to Heal, a production of Be Inspired Global Media. If you have been burdened with a church secret and want to be free and healed, please email us
at mychurchsecret@gmail.com.
You can also follow us on Twitter
at ChurchSecrets1.
Look for new episodes of Secrets of the Church every Friday. And remember, you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free.